In the previous video, we saw an example of callback hell. And in this video, we're going to start looking at how the code can be simplified to be easier to understand and maintain. So let me go ahead and switch back over to this project. And I'm going to create a new file called promises.js. Non-callback oriented code that you would see in a regular JavaScript program is going to look something like this. So function add, and it's going to take two parameters a and b, and it's going to return a plus b. And then you'll have a function main, and it's going to let a result equal add a, let's make it 2 and 3, and then console.log result. And then we'll call main to kick it off. So this is a fairly normal bit of code, and what it does is it calls a function, and then the function does some calculation and returns the result back to where you called the function. And then inside of the caller, you have access to the return result, and you can do whatever you want with it within the code. And this is fairly easy to maintain because you have the result available, and you can add whatever code you want, and you can do things with this result and calculate other results and stuff with the other results and so on. The callback version, you don't have the result back here. So the callback version is going to look something like this. It takes a callback, and then it's going to call the callback on a plus b. And then instead of getting result back here and calling console.log on it, what you do instead is pass it a function that takes a value and then executes some code on that value. Right, so this should do the same thing. Let's execute promises. And it prints 5, just like the other one would have if I'd actually run it. But what's the difference? Well, the difference is I can't do anything else with result here. I can't say, let R2 equal result plus 2, and then console.log R2. This is not going to work because result doesn't work. What do I get if I say let result equals that? Well, add is not returning a result. And so result is just going to be undefined. And I'm going to add undefined to 2. And what I end up with is not a number, because undefined plus a number is not a number. So the callback way of doing things makes it really hard if you want to have a sequence of operations where you get a result and you do something with it and you do something with that and you do something with that, because the result is never here. The result is only available inside of here and is passed into this callback, which I pass in right there. So what if you want to make this look more like a regular piece of code where you're actually returning something and then doing stuff with what it's returning? If this is an asynchronous function, there's a little issue. So potentially, and this is a little hard to wrap your mind around, but bear with me. So potentially calling this function can take longer than executing this function, right? So this function is just going to basically blow right past this call. Add is not going to return anything. It will do this stuff, and then the main thread of execution is going to exit main. And meanwhile, the stuff in this callback is only going to get executed sometime in the future when the results are actually available, if this is asynchronous. So you might not actually have this result until after you've finished main entirely. Okay, so there's a little timing issue. The way JavaScript deals with that is it keeps track of an event loop, and code can add things to the event loop, and then whenever the main thread of execution has some extra time, it checks the event loop to see if there are any pending tasks that need to get finished. And so if you start something that's asynchronous that can take a long bit of time, like fetching something from the database, that causes the callback to be added to the event queue, so that when the result comes in, and then when the main thread of execution goes to check the event queue, that's actually when the callback gets executed on the result. Okay, that's what lets you not get hung up in main while you're waiting for this thing to finish. So you have this tension. You have the tension between wanting to return a result that you can do stuff with in this code on the one hand, but on the other hand, wanting this thing to be able to finish before the thing that it's called is actually finished. So the technology that was developed in order to deal with this situation and sort of balances things together is something called promises. And the idea here is that instead of returning a result, so I'm going to pretend that plus is an expensive operation that handles asynchronously. Instead of a plus b, and I don't know how long this is going to take, so I can't really return that, what I'm going to do instead is return a promise to produce this value at some time in the future. And then that promise is an object that has some methods on it. And the methods include ways of attaching a callback that gets called with the result when it comes in, or a piece of code that gets executed if there's an error when I'm doing this. So let's look at a concrete example. So in the chat server, we have this database code here, and so it's making a connection to the database, and when the database code is available, then it goes ahead and executes some code on the connection that gets returned in this callback. So this callback here actually executes a query on this pool, which was the result of executing this connect statement. Okay. What I'm going to do instead is, let me copy this little bit of code here and paste it in my promises. Let's call this db connect. And instead of putting the callback here, like I had in the other bit of code, I'm just going to close this off. Now, this is going to work with the MS-SQL library because MS-SQL was deliberately written to make this work. So this is not something that you get for free. This is something that the designers of MS-SQL have worked to provide as functionality. But what it's going to do is, if you give it a callback like we had in the other version, it's going to call the callback when this thing completes. If you don't give it a callback, it's going to instead return a promise. So if I don't give the callback, I can say return that. And then here, if I call dbconnect, this is going to return a promise, and then promise is going to be in the variable result. So let's go ahead and run it now. And it took a second, or maybe 2 seconds. And what it printed out was a promise object, and it has a status of pending. So, okay, well, if I'm just returning a promise to produce a result at some time in the future, then have I really solved a problem? I mean, I still need to get code to execute based on the result. So how do I do that? Well, as I said, promises are objects that have methods. And so what I can do is I can call a then method on result. And actually, let me, I can't quite write this just yet. So what I can do instead, though, is this. So result.then val goes to console.log val. So what this says is when this bit of code here finishes and I have the final value, any bits of code that were attached using then are going to get executed, and the value is going to get passed in, and then it will be available here. So let's go ahead and run it. We'll see what it does. So it took a couple of seconds to connect to the database, and then what I got was console.log of this connection pool, which is the result. So waited for the result promise to resolve, and when it resolved, the value it resolved to was then passed in to console.log and printed. So this thing is basically like a callback, right? I mean, it is like passing a callback into this connect, except it's a little easier to work with here, and I can also chain these together. So whatever the then returns is also going to be a value in a new promise that I can then chain another then off of. So I can, for example, say then, and then some other value. And then this value will be whatever this thing returns, because big arrow function with no curly brackets, whatever this returns, that's going to be the return value for this function. And then that's used to construct a new promise, which gets, which I'm then chaining off of. And I think console.log probably returns undefined. So let's go ahead and see what we get. We'll get two prints. The first one will be a pool, and the second will be whatever console.log prints, which is this undefined there. Okay, but this could be a different value. So for example, let's do that. And instead of returning console.log, what I'm going to return is, let's do return. So this val is actually the connection pool. Pool.query select top 10 star from posts, semicolon. And once again, I'm not passing in a callback here, and because MSSQL was written deliberately to do it this way, this is going to return a promise as well. So then this promise is then going to get executed here, and then when the results arrive, when this promise is resolved, then I'm going to see the results from my database query in this console.log. So if I scroll back, the first console.log, oh, actually, did I have a, I didn't have a first console.log. I'm not printing pool anywhere. I'm just returning it. And then when I get the value of this query, then I print that, and that's what I see. So there's the actual results from the database for the first 10 rows of the database. So this is like a callback, but the ability that I have to sort of chain these thens together and execute them one after the other, and to take the result of this one and feed it into the input of this one, it's very much like doing sequential programming. It's more like it. The reason this works is because basically everything from here on is asynchronous. right? I'm returning this result synchronously, and I can return it immediately because it's not resolved to any value. It doesn't take any time to do that. I'm just making an object. And then this then gets executed asynchronously, and so does this one. And so at no point am I actually waiting for this to finish on my main thread. I can be long out of main before the results actually come in. So let's go ahead and just to drive that home a little bit, instead of calling console.log here, what I'll do is I'll return val.recordset, which should be an array of objects. And then I will call then on that, and that will be record set. And then here I'm going to say for r in r, actually let's do rs.forEach, record goes to console.log back quote $sign r.name colon $sign r.post. And then close that off, and then close that off. And so it gets the first 10 records out of the database, and this was a join and this was a leave, so the posts are null, and then formats them and displays them on the console.